Space station is just the beginning. It's the stepping stone to allow us perhaps to take a trip to Mars, to build another space station around Mars.
But to critics, the space station is the single biggest mistake NASA has ever made.
The space station currently stands as the largest single obstacle to the continued exploration of space. It is expensive, there is no science, it has no purpose any longer at all.
T-minus 3 minutes and counting.
Tonight, NASA's longest journey to the launch pad is finally over. It is their night to show the world how America builds a space station.
T-minus 2 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. Everything continues to look good with the weather.
OTC already hit the clear on the F7.
T-minus 1 minute and counting.
We are go for launch.
And we have had to cut off the countdown. We did not pick up the countdown in time to meet the very end of our launch window.
The story of the International Space Station is a tale of dreams and disappointments. The current plan is that it will provide a unique platform for humans in space, a laboratory for scientific research, and a focus for international collaboration. But the purpose of the space station has changed many times over the years of planning, and it is now at the center of a debate which has challenged scientists and governments for 40 years. Is it worth sending humans into space at all? The space station is a crucial step to fulfilling the age-old dream of humans journeying to the stars.
10, 9, ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
As soon as humans left the Earth, they became heroes, pioneers in the quest to colonize the solar system. In 1969, 3 American astronauts went to the moon. But to NASA, this was just the beginning of an even grander voyage.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The long-held dream was to build a permanent human settlement in space, a space station in orbit around the Earth, with a crew of scientists living and working on board. NASA engineers had plenty of ideas of how it might look, but they hadn't yet solved the huge technical problems of how to keep humans alive in space for years at a time. They would need to devise complex life support systems that could recycle all the air and water for the crew on their isolated spaceship. And there was a more basic challenge. How could the costs of sending humans into space be justified when there was already a much cheaper and easier way to explore the solar system? NASA scientists working away from the manned program had been dispatching robotic probes into the cosmos since 1962. The information they were sending back was revolutionizing our understanding of the planets and the universe beyond. And they cost a small fraction of the manned space program. Humans had traveled 250,000 miles to the moon. Probes had traveled 1 billion miles past Saturn.
There was a debate between those who wanted to put men or women into space, on the moon, on Mars, or whatever. And the other view was that you could do a lot with machines. And the weight of the evidence came down on there being much more that could be accomplished at much lower cost with machines than with humans, and without the same risk.
throughout the 70s, NASA's plans for the space station were quietly shelved. And by the early 1980s, the dream could have died altogether. Were it not for a challenge that had dogged the Americans and their ambitions in space for years. A challenge from the old Cold War enemy, the Russians.
The Russians believe in the long-term space station in orbit. Their Salyut craft have been up for years. Russian cosmonauts held all the records for spending really long periods in space, and they speculate on the possibilities of building up really large stations from which they could launch further rockets to the planets.
There was one American president who was determined to meet this challenge, and in 1984, he declared his intent.
America has always been greatest when we dared to be great. We can reach for greatness again. We can follow our dreams to distant stars, living and working in space for peaceful economic and scientific gain. Tonight, I am directing NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade.
And so, Space Station Freedom was born. The trouble was, the costs of designing and building it would be phenomenal. NASA prepared itself for a showdown with the White House budget team.
Well, I was budget director, and I had responsibility for putting together the president's budget and how much would be spent on each agency, including NASA. When we went into the cabinet room to have the meeting, and there were the NASA people, and I had my people from OMB, my mouth open, my jaw dropped, because right there, sitting in front of where the president was to sit, were all these little models of the space station and the launch vehicles and so forth. The president came down, he sat down, and he picked these up, and he goes, that's interesting. And he starts turning them over, and I'm over there sweating like, oh my gosh, I could see my losing this contest. In the end, he sided with NASA and not with me.
The space station of President Reagan's dreams would be far larger than anything Russia had ever put into orbit, and its main purpose would be commercial. For every dollar spent on the project, NASA predicted $7 would be generated back on Earth.
The benefits to be reaped from our work in space literally dazzle the imagination. Together, we can produce rare, life-saving medicines, saving thousands of lives and hundreds of millions of dollars. We can manufacture super chips, and we can produce special alloys and biological materials that benefit greatly from a zero-gravity environment.
There was good reason for optimism. Weightlessness, or microgravity, was an alluring phenomenon that promised to improve the efficiency of industrial processes. American business was expected to leap at the chance to invest in the enterprise. But first, NASA would have to come in on time and on budget, building the space station. Freedom would need to be in orbit by 1994 for a total cost of $8 billion. But as soon as NASA started seriously to analyze their plans for the space station, they began to see just how ambitious their original vision had been. It would be difficult to achieve at any cost, let alone $8 billion.
Remember what you're into now. You're into a very high-tech, never-done-before type of a job. So a bunch of people get in the same room and they claim that they can get the job done, and I think that maybe they get a little bit over-exuberant in what they think they can do, and then the real truth hits them downstream.
We had said that we could build the spacecraft for the space station in its original form for $8 billion. The president said that's okay. In fact, what happened was, in a funny kind of way, we had sort of shot ourselves in the foot. This particular piece you see here is the manned part of the program. But let me tell you a little bit about what we've got here as a result of that, recognizing that it may not look anything like this by the time we build it. The model that we showed to the president was conceptual, and we had done very little work from a design point of view. We only had the broadest sense of life support system, and we had the broadest sense of what experiments we could do. So, You really had to go a lot further before you could say, yes, we can now build that.
NASA invested in their first redesign. Gone was the central cluster of modules. The station would be more stable with the crew quarters at one end, pointing towards Earth. The new arrangement was radical, it was ingenious, and 12 months later, it was scrapped. The design would have generated such a strong gravitational field that it would make all microgravity experiments impossible. This was a blow. By now, it was already 1986. 2 years into the project, and they were already seriously behind schedule. The $8 billion NASA needed from Congress had become $12 billion.
Agencies have incentives to lowball the estimates to get Congress to buy on. Once Congress has bought on to a big program such as this, they don't want to admit error, to confess it wasn't a good idea from the very beginning, so they'll throw more money and more money and more money just to cover up the fact they may have made a wrong decision at the very beginning.
Still on paper, the new design began to grow. Partners from Europe, Japan and Canada were invited to bring their own modules on board. NASA then planned to enlarge the framework, imagining adding solar and stellar observation platforms, telescopes, a satellite servicing enclosure, and solar panels with options for multiple solar energy collectors. By 1989, the blueprint had grown to show a 500-foot megastructure, and the projected costs had quadrupled. Worse, the flood of investment from American businesses had failed to materialize, undermining Reagan's original vision. The space station needed a new purpose. In 1989, a new president took office. George Bush gave NASA its new mission.
We must commit ourselves anew to a sustained program of manned exploration of the solar system, and yes, the permanent settlement of space. And then a journey into tomorrow, a journey to another planet, a manned mission to Mars.
As well as planning for Mars, NASA was told to cut the price back down. The space station design was stripped and shrunk, and yet the projected cost just kept growing. By 1992, just 2 years away from Reagan's deadline to put the space station into orbit, NASA had spent its entire original budget. All the money had gone on research, designs and redesigns, but not a single piece of hardware had gone into space. The entire $8 billion had been spent, and they still had no space station.
In fact, what happened was most of that $8 billion got spent on people, salaries and expenses. The one thing we had done was to spend the $8 billion. So that was kind of sad in a way.
And then things really started to go wrong. The Russians had not been idle. They were busy working on Mir, their own permanently manned space station, launched in 1986. It was modest, it was cramped, it was smelly, but it worked. And it was proof that the Russians had solved the important problem: how to keep crews alive in space for years at a time without huge supplies of fresh air and water from Earth. The cosmonauts on Mir were rebreathing purified air and using water recycled from their own sweat and urine. It was unlike anything America had ever put into orbit. Compared to Mir, the American plans began to look overly ambitious.
Американцы еще в чем ошиблись? А делать огромные станции с огромными батареями, с огромной энергетикой. Чисто американский подход. Если делать, то вот делать такое. Мы стремились делать скромные станции, чтобы искать вот эти пути, чтобы ответить себе на вопрос, зачем мы делаем, где самое главное направление, которое является перспективным. И мы все время говорили себе, своим друзьям, нельзя так делать, как делают американцы, надо делать вот так, как мы делаем.
Every 90 minutes, NASA officials could look up at the sky and see Mir as it flew over the United States. But their own vast space station was still on the drawing board, and people began to doubt when, if ever, it would be built.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
1993, a new president and a new initiative. Bill Clinton took one look at the estimated $400 billion required to land humans on Mars and dropped the plan. For a while, it seemed that the space station was destined to die too. It was now 6 years behind schedule and costing $8 million a day just to keep the program up and running. But something had happened that would give the station yet another chance in secret.
The first proposal they made to us was that we could build off of their orbiting Mir. They made a presentation to us on that. We politely thanked them and told them that wasn't what we wanted to do. So they immediately proposed that we give them X number of dollars and go away for about 4 or 5 years, and they'd build us one. And we politely told them that wasn't what we wanted to do either. So then it came down to identifying their assets that they wanted to contribute to the space station, the assets that we had, and trying to fit those assets into a configuration that was technically viable.
Now called the International Space Station, the project was redesigned once again. Within a few weeks, it was agreed that the Russians would provide early modules that would bring with them the crucial life support systems and propulsion for the space station and crew rescue vehicles. Gradually, the American, European and Japanese modules would be added on. The deal gave NASA key parts of the space station, which the Russians knew how to build, that the Americans were having problems making for themselves. Dan Goldin, NASA's boss, seemed ecstatic.
This is a historic moment, and I'm just very excited. Mr. Kopchev, I want to give you a hug.
Behind the scenes of this great embrace, the reality was more mundane. This is the Khrunichev Space Vehicle Assembly Factory outside Moscow. These are the engineers who've maintained the Soviet Union's continuous manned presence in space since 1987. The space program was desperate for funding, but the new collaboration with America was not what they had in mind.
И нам это обидно. Обидно то, что мы вынуждены принимать помощь. И дело не в том, что это соперник бывший или не соперник, а просто вот другая страна нам помогает, а мы сами такие умные и способные. То есть здесь есть две стороны такой. С одной стороны, конечно, мы понимаем, что американцы помогают нам финансово, но они помогают и себе тоже, мы тоже это понимаем.
Do you think the space station would ever have happened without the international cooperation?
In 1993, it didn't look like that it would. It looked to me, and I don't pay a lot of attention to politics, etc., but it did look like to me that it was in a high probability of being canceled.
So the Russians saved the bacon?
I think so.
Inside Russia's vacuum test facility, final checks are underway on the next generation of spacesuit for cosmonauts on the International Space Station. With Russia's great expertise and hardware to call upon, once the agreement had been signed, construction of the modules could begin immediately. It seemed that NASA would no longer be dependent on American contractors who were still at the design stage for some of the important space station parts. Yet American congressmen were determined that American firms would build the major parts of what many still saw as an American space station. Here in Huntsville, Alabama, NASA engineers continue to try to sort out problems with crucial parts of the life support systems planned for the American modules.
To get water or anything else into space, it costs about $10,000 per pound. And so at 10,000 pounds weight needed per year for water, that comes out to about $100 million per year per crew person.
Up to 7 people will live aboard the space station. Supplying them with water from Earth would cost $700 million a year, so NASA is working on the only alternative.
The way we are approaching that is to make use of every drop of water possible on the station by repurifying it through a system that we are developing here at the Marshall Space Flight Center.
Tucked away in a corner of a hangar is NASA's water recycling test facility. Here, volunteers exercise to simulate life on the space station. Their perspiration, the water vapor they exhale, and their urine is carefully collected, as is the water they use. It can then be recycled. NASA and its contractors have been working on these systems for over a decade. But whilst they're good at collecting the water, things aren't moving so fast on the recycling process.
We are in the preliminary design stages of that equipment. It's still on paper at this point. And we're just beginning to order the parts that we need, but we don't actually have the hardware under fabrication yet, under manufacture yet.
These are the people who design life support systems for Mir. By adopting a simpler technical approach developed over 30 years, the Russians have been able to solve many of the engineering problems the Americans still face. Here at an institute outside Moscow, they've engineered machines that can generate oxygen and filter stale air and wastewater, including urine, that function reliably in the weightlessness of space. They're especially proud of their heat-based urine water recycling technology.
Ну просто святая вода.
Когда мы приступили к этой работе, то обязательно и я, и все присутствующие обязательно первыми пили воду, которая была регулирована из конденсатов серолаги, из урины, поэтому мы на себе убедились, что качество воды хорошее. Атмосфера на станции, хотя она уже эксплуатируется больше 10 лет, такая, что воздух чище даже, чем в Калифорнии.
Over the past 3 years, Boeing has independently assessed key components of the Russian recycling systems in use on Mir. They work well.
From working with the Russians, we've learned you don't have to have extremely sophisticated support equipment in order to have something that's reliable and functioning. They've had their station there for 10 years. They've had their life support system for 10 years. One thing that we've found is when they say that they have a specification, it works that way.
So why don't the Americans use the Russian life support systems on the American part of the space station?
We wanted to have a capability not only on the Russian side of the station, but a capability on the U.S. side as a way to provide additional levels of safety. For example, if the Russian system that's there were to become inoperable, then there would be a fallback by having the equipment on our side of the station. So the two kind of complement each other. But the Russian systems are very good systems, but we think that these systems that are being developed here will be even better.
At the moment, NASA is still struggling with the dynamics of separating gases, liquids and solids in microgravity in its life support systems. They also have another problem, in that the equipment that they hope to put on the space station has never been tested before in long-duration spaceflight.
This is the life support module where we're testing the life support systems for the International Space Station Laboratory module. We're actually doing tests as we speak on the air revitalization systems.
How long has this been in development?
We started work on the air revitalization systems in 1984. We've got a few problems we're still trying to work on, one of them being the mission type situations where we figure out operationally how these subsystems should work and make sure that we don't have any problems operationally when we actually fly.
Have any of these systems in here ever flown for any duration in space?
None of the ones that we have in this simulator have ever flown.
The systems that we're developing, that's true, they have not flown in space before. We are dependent on them working properly from day one when they get there.
Do you think you meet your deadlines?
Yes, we'll meet that.
Confident of that?
Yes.
Всем нашим коллегам и в Соединенных Штатах Америки, и в Европе желаю добиться хороших успехов в создании тех систем, которые им поручены.
Even when the components are ready, the effort to build the space station will have barely begun.
Houston Discovery, roll program.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
It will take 45 flights over 5 years to assemble the giant in orbit. The astronauts involved in construction will have to spend 960 hours doing spacewalks, bolting 100 different components together.
How did it go down there? Oh, pretty darn good.
Spacewalks are about as risky as space can get. Alone, outside the spacecraft for up to 7 hours at a time, cosmonauts and astronauts are exposed to radiation and the ever-present chance of accidents.
I lost the whisk socket and it's retractable. I don't know how it came off.
A spacesuit could catch on a sharp edge. A pinhole tear could result in instant death. A hatch could jam, leaving the astronauts stranded.
As soon as you're ready, you can grab the arm and we'll be ready to move you.
As part of their cost analysis of the space station, NASA's auditors have had to assess the risks.
The estimates of risk are very high, that something will occur over a period of 5 years. I think we took a look and they said the estimates are about 92% that something will occur, either a launch slip or something that might not work in space. After all, you're now talking about over 840 hours in space, astronauts flying through space at 18,000 miles per hour, building things. 3 times more spacewalks than we've had for all spacecraft that we had, combined since Apollo to now.
In Houston, if you copy, Jeff's just working, putting the doors back together and thinks he's found a way that seems to close the gap, and we're going to try that, if that's okay.
The number of things that possibly could go wrong, from simple things like connectors not mating up properly to bigger things like a micrometeoroid penetration of a module, or space debris penetration of a module and the depressurization that would result. There's so many things. It's a myriad number of things that possibly could go wrong. And because this vehicle is so large, involves so many complex systems, any one of those things could happen.
Hopefully it won't be the ultimate bad thing. The ultimate bad thing, God forbid, is that we could have an accident, somebody could lose their life, but that's the price of getting into space.
With so much at stake, the questions persist. What mission would be worth the ultimate price?
The explanations for why we need a space station have changed year after year. It began, of course, in the Reagan administration, and there they portrayed the space station as some sort of an R&D facility where they're turning out high-tech doodads for industry. It was quickly apparent that that was not going to work, so they redesigned the space station. Each time redesigning it to fit new missions, as we went from the R&D laboratory in space to the preparations for going to Mars, to international relations. Each time we go through another one of these changes, there is another redesign of the space station.
Но я точно знаю, что сейчас еще мы не знаем, для чего мы делаем орбитальные станции. И сейчас еще задачи, вот эти вот исследования материалов, исследования, те работы, которые ведутся на станции, мы еще не знаем, насколько они необходимы. Я твердо уверен, что они необходимы, что вот эти вот результаты будут получены, но для этого надо работать. Работать, и это придет, и будет ясно. Но сейчас еще.
Here at the Cape Kennedy Visitors Center, NASA's case for the space station is presented to the public.
Feel free to take pictures of anything you see. We'll be arriving at the International Space Station complex in about 10 to 12 minutes. For many of you, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so if you have to talk, please talk quietly so your neighbors can hear the commentary.
For many Earthlings, the manned exploration of space has a kind of magic that is irresistible. They're also told about the many scientific and medical benefits that will come from a permanent presence in space. Chief among these is the importance of microgravity to the search for new drugs against disease, a promise which depends on the science of protein crystal growth.
Researchers are especially excited about the ability to grow ultra-pure protein crystals, critical to medical research. You see, without the effects of gravity, scientists get a truer picture of the cell structure, and with this understanding, it may be possible to move more quickly to cures for diseases like cancer and AIDS. Now, of course, there is just one little thing that needs to happen before all these miraculous discoveries can take place. We'll have to build and assemble the largest, most complex structure ever to be placed in orbit.
The excitement over protein crystals grown in space is that, free from the pull of gravity, they should be bigger and more perfectly formed than those grown on Earth. So it's easier to examine their molecular structure with X-rays.
The better the quality of that crystal, it allows us to see details in the final structure, like the small hydrogen atoms that we could not see with the Earth-grown crystals, and that allows us to move forward with the drug design more rapidly.
In 1992, Larry DeLucas flew protein crystal growth experiments on the shuttle.
Crystals are right now about 0.6 to 0.7 of a millimeter in size, and they're going to grow a lot bigger before we're coming down from orbit.
Larry DeLucas was in space for 2 weeks tending his protein crystals. Today, he's director of an institute which studies and promotes protein crystal growth in space.
Probably as many as 20 to 25 new protein structures have been determined to higher resolution than was possible with Earth-grown crystals. From those, there are many now possible drugs that are in clinical trials. Most drugs are developed using this technology here on Earth, but space can help us accelerate the process, can help us see the details with more resolution, and that helps us move forward more quickly. So it saves time, and that's very important in the drug discovery process.
But many scientists query whether protein crystals grown in space are really any better than those grown on Earth for medical research. Greg Farber is a member of NASA's Protein Crystallization Review Panel.
If I were trying to figure out how to best spend money to get better protein crystals, I wouldn't go to space. I would keep the money here on Earth and put it into advanced X-ray sources here on Earth. It has been a real surprise to me that NASA has continued to promote those protein crystals in space. One might hope that they had better reasons to build the space station than just protein crystal growth at this point.
To test out NASA's claims for space crystal growth, Greg Farber flew some experiments on Mir.
We found, much as NASA found, small improvements. The key word for us was small improvements. We definitely saw increases in resolution, but they were rather small. I haven't done a microgravity experiment in 6 years, and I see no reason to go back.
The kind of crystals that we obtain from space is shown here. You're looking at right here crystals of a flu protein called neuraminidase that were grown in space. This is a protein involved in a disease called emphysema. Crystals of a plant protein shown here, and these are crystals of a protein that we're looking at to actually develop an insecticide for plants. And then finally, these are crystals of a protein involved in diabetes that I'm sure you've heard of called insulin.
This is a crystal of hen egg white lysozyme that one of the undergraduates here at Penn State grew in actually their junior level biochemistry course. The undergraduate had no experience in protein crystal growth prior to this. Here are crystals of lysozyme that we grew on Mir. I know because I've put both crystals in the X-ray beam that the crystals that the undergraduates grew this semester at Penn State are really every bit as good as the crystals that we were able to grow on Mir, or as good as the crystals that NASA is able to grow up on the shuttle currently.
This will come as no surprise to the scientists who for years have been evaluating the benefits of the science done by astronauts for people on Earth.
Certainly the space station began that providing this facility one could do an awful lot of science. And some internal NASA reports looked at the whole panoply of space science that might be accomplished, including looking down at the Earth, looking out at the heavens, a station for launching other probes around the universe and the solar system. But by the time of 1990, 1991, the National Space Council said that the space station basically wasn't needed for most space-related research.
The situation seems to be much the same today.
At this point in time, I still don't see a sufficient science that could be done on the station that would benefit humans on Earth, that would warrant the kinds of expenses that are involved.
And to Larry DeLucas, science alone cannot justify the phenomenal cost of the space station. It is only worth doing as part of a long-term program leading to manned exploration of the solar system.
If we're not going to continue to explore, then it's very difficult to make a case for doing this. It's all about future exploration. Absolutely. The reason for doing this is so that ultimately we will have the ability to leave this planet and inhabit other planets.
We're going to hear a lot more about Mars in the months to come. The industry that's building the space station realizes that now that it's actually being assembled, that's going to come to an end. They've got to have something else. And now they don't really care if they go to Mars or not, but they want a plan to go to Mars. Because after all, we spent something like $12 billion on the space station before they turned out a piece of hardware. I mean, this is good business.
Right now, the transit time to go to Mars is about 6 months each direction. The second piece of it is to stay on Mars so that the planets line up for a minimum transit back to Earth is about 2 years. A mission length would be about 3 years, about 1,000 days might be a good measure.
The cost of sending humans to Mars is estimated to be about $500 billion. But by the time people get there, NASA will have already thoroughly explored the red planet with robots, bringing back samples of rocks, soil and the atmosphere. Robots don't need complex life support systems or expensive space stations. To scientists such as Bob Park, this is the future.
We can let a little robot wander as far and as long as we like. They don't have to come back for the cold nights. They don't have to have lunch. They don't have to stop for tea. They never complain. And that's the way we're going to explore Mars.
So far, 30 Russian and American probes have been dispatched to the red planet, and more missions are planned.
Look, the space program has brought enormous benefits to the world in terms of the satellites that monitor our weather, that spy on our enemies, that send communications around the world. It has rewritten all of the textbooks on our solar system and now on the universe. All of that has come out of the unmanned space program. It's all robotic.
This is the Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins University. From here, they've designed over 50 unmanned satellites, which have helped revolutionize our view of the solar system. Today, they're tracking a satellite that, having traveled nearly 2 billion miles in 2 years, is planned to go into orbit around an asteroid and then photograph and measure it in every imaginable manner. It is all controlled from the corner of this room.
Here it is. The whole thing is disarmingly underwhelming. 3 people working and sending all the control commands to the spacecraft. The new way of doing business is called better, faster, and most importantly, cheaper. And we are the paradigm for how to do small missions in the planetary arena with a minimum of personnel and a lot of capability, nevertheless.
The mission costs just over $100 million, the same as the launch cost of water for one astronaut for 1 year in space.
How many satellites could you launch into the solar system for the cost of the International Space Station?
Oh my gosh, I don't think you can count how many. It depends on whose numbers you believe, but I mean, so far, as you know, about $20 billion has been spent, and I'm sure you can probably do 100 satellites for that easily.
And you could explore the solar system with that?
Oh, yeah.
I think that you can only get so far with robotic spacecraft. I think ultimately, who wouldn't want to go out there and meet, understand another culture? I mean, that to me is part of the mysterious unknowns in the universe that I think many people have a quest to understand.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference.
To some, dreams of encountering aliens may seem far-fetched. The nearest known planet beyond our solar system is 15 light-years away. Yet to others, this is the very vision that manned spaceflight is based upon.
The principal reason that NASA supports manned spaceflight is a conviction that the American people will not pay for a space program that does not involve humans. I think that's never been tested, and I believe it's wrong. I think people are way ahead of the politicians and the leaders on this one, as they often are.
The International Space Station is now due for completion in 2005, and the costs are still rising.
The cost of the space station up there will be somewhere around $22 to $24 billion for the flight hardware we're putting on orbit and getting it through to where it's operational.
Does that include the cost of the shuttle flights to put it up there?
No, it does not include the cost of the shuttle flights.
And how much would that add?
Each shuttle flight, if one looked at it on an annual basis, is around $380 to $400 million. We're talking about 6 to 8 shuttle flights per year. We're talking about 43 or so shuttle flights over the life of the assembly of space station.
So we're talking about another $20 billion.
Correct.
So we're up to about $40 to $50 billion.
Right.
What about the cost of replenishing the space station with supplies, with spares, and with
Well,
things
the
like
operational cost is about $1.5 billion a year.
The American government's official bookkeepers calculate the total cost to be around $96 billion.
The General Accounting Office has come up with a figure that's $96 billion, something
Correct.
like that. How do you feel about that figure?
When you the figure is accurate the way they count. I mean, if you count in all of the resources, that's a fair number.
The cost has grown from $8 billion to nearly $100 billion. The International Space Station has become the most expensive object ever in the history of the world.
We have to know why we're building the space station. It was clear in the middle of the Cold War why you built a space station. Space was a symbol, and it was a war fought with symbols. But that war's over, And now we need to get on with the business of exploring our solar system. There's so much to be done. There's so much we can learn. And this thing just stands in the way.
Once we